My God, she never had an abortion? He stood frozen in the middle of the afternoon market, his heart pounding as if it might shatter. 8 months ago, he was the one who delivered the verdict, the one who coldly demanded she end the life growing inside her. She only nodded, calm as someone who had accepted their fate, and he believed her enough to turn his back, to file for divorce, to move on as if everything was settled. But now, amidst the crowd, he saw her rounded belly, her hand gently supporting her back, her eyes still shining with quiet pride. Every lie, every silence, every distance suddenly formed a brutal truth. She had never done what he ordered. She had kept it. So, this child, would it be born as a curse, or as a miracle he had rejected? Their wedding took place on a June day, under the oppressive heat of a small Texas town. The local church was adorned with clusters of yellow lights. Candles flickered on the altar, and wooden pews creaked under the weight of hundreds of curious gazes. The townsfolk believed this was proof of a youthful love, a picture-perfect couple. Emily found herself a strong man, they whispered. Robert's so lucky to have such a sweet, good girl. But the truth was far from what they saw. Even when the priest asked the familiar question, "Do you take this woman?" Robert only nodded, quick and curt, revealing nothing but the weariness in his eyes. For him, the wedding wasn't the fruit of love, but an arrangement. His stern father had said, "It's time you settled down. A man can't wander aimlessly forever." And Emily, gentle, pure, the daughter of a respectable local family, was the perfect choice. Emily loved him sincerely, not with fiery passion, but in the way one breathes, naturally, without reason. She loved his quietness, the way he sat for hours on the porch saying nothing, even his guarded nature that others called cold. She believed that with patience, his heart would open. On their wedding day, walking in a simple white dress, she smiled radiantly, thinking this was the start of a long life together. But for Robert, every step down the aisle was a sentence. He felt as if he were being chained to a role he hadn't chosen. His love, if it existed, belonged elsewhere, to a faded memory, a girl whose name he never spoke. In his heart, the space for Emily was filled only with silence. The house they moved into after the wedding sat on the edge of town, built of rough brick walls and weathered wooden eaves. It was a gift from both families, a symbol of new beginnings. But inside, it wasn't laughter that filled the space, it was emptiness. Emily hung bright curtains, placed wildflowers in glass jars, and tucked little notes into her husband's pockets, silly things like, "Today I dreamed we went to the beach," or "Last night you smiled in your sleep." Robert read them, stuffed them into a drawer, and never responded. The townsfolk whispered behind their backs, "He seems so cold." Emily smiled, deflecting. "He's just tired. He'll come around." She was patient, like a gardener watering a barren tree, hoping one day it would bloom. As time passed, that hope became a burden. Each time she brought him a cup of cinnamon coffee, Robert felt his chest tighten, not with joy, but with guilt. He wanted to smile, to say thank you, but his lips froze like stone. Her love was so vast it felt like a giant shadow blocking every escape. One stormy night, Emily fell ill with a high fever. She trembled, her breathing ragged, her eyes clouded. Robert, panicked, drove through the rain to the pharmacy, soaked to the bone. He returned, placed warm cloths on her forehead, and sat by her side all night, muttering words he didn't even understand. When the fever broke, Emily slept peacefully in his arms. In that moment, Robert felt something stir in his chest, as if his heart wanted to leap to life, but he lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, terrified of the feeling itself. The next morning, when Emily opened her eyes and saw him still there, she smiled softly. She wanted to hold on to that moment, believing it was a sign he had changed. But Robert only stood up, saying curtly, "I have to go to work," as if the night before never happened. Emily swallowed her disappointment, still believing just a bit more patience would do. Yet the distance between them never closed. It grew into a chasm, one side filled with innocent love, the other with heavy silence. And in that silence, the first seeds of ruin took root. Tuesday nights in the little house on the edge of town were much the same. Outside, the prairie wind slipped through old wooden doors, whistling through every crack, making the house hum softly. Inside, dinner was neatly set. 2 portions of grilled meat, mashed potatoes, and a cold beer placed beside Robert's plate. Emily sat across from him, hands clasped, offering a faint smile as he pulled out his chair. But the smile faded quickly as the table sank into thick silence. Only the clink of cutlery against plates broke the monotony, like a clock ticking in an empty room. Robert's father, a gray-haired man with stern eyes, sometimes joined them, as if conducting an unspoken inspection. He leaned back in the wooden armchair, sipped his beer, and let slip a comment that froze the room. "What keeps a man with a woman isn't love, it's duty." He said it casually, light as a breath, as if commenting on the weather. Without looking at his son, he spoke with the certainty of a verdict already written into life. Emily paused mid-motion. She was used to heavy words delivered in soft tones. They were like knives wrapped in thin paper, not cutting right away but sharp enough to slice over time. She lowered her head, spread butter on her bread, pretending to be unfazed. Robert sat there, fingers gripping the neck of his beer bottle. He didn't respond, but each word landed like a stone, piling up, weighing him down. He understood. To his father, marriage wasn't about happiness, but about bearing a load. And he, the obedient son, had accepted that role, even if it killed the rest of him. Dinner continued in silence. Emily wanted to break the heaviness with a small story about the backyard garden, about the neighbor's cat lounging on their porch. But when she looked up and saw Robert's vacant eyes, she stopped. She didn't want to perform a monologue before 2 silent walls, one her father-in-law, the other her husband. The ceiling light cast a glow on Emily's face, illuminating eyes accustomed to enduring. She still loved Robert, even when that love felt like a dull knife cutting into her palm. Each day, she tried to spark a little light, but the dark room of their marriage swallowed every faint glow. Robert was different. He didn't know what to do with his wife's love. It was like a gift too costly to return but impossible to keep. It suffocated him, turning her every kindness into an accusation. He knew she waited for a reaction, a hug, a "thank you." But he was powerless. His lips stayed stone, his heart locked in a keyless room. Outside, neighbors sometimes gossiped. "Robert's too cold." But Emily always defended him. "He's just tired. He'll change." She said it to others, and to herself. She believed in patience, believed true love would come, just not yet. After dinner, Robert's father stood, clapped his son's shoulder firmly, as if reminding him his life was already scripted. He left, leaving behind a heavier emptiness. The door closed. The house sank into quiet, with only the dry tick of the clock. Emily cleared the dishes, her movements gentle, careful, as if each plate were a fragile hope that could shatter if mishandled. Robert sat still, eyes on the table, lost in vague thoughts. He felt he was living a life he hadn't chosen. He married because his father wanted it, and now each day was just a continuation of that role. In that moment, Emily looked up at him. She wanted to ask, "Are you happy?" But she bit her lip, letting it pass. She feared the answer. Sometimes, silence was how one preserved the last shred of hope. Each morning, Emily woke half an hour before Robert. She brewed cinnamon coffee, added a touch of brown sugar as he liked, set the mug on the wooden table by the window, and scribbled a short note in her neat, round handwriting. "It's nice out today. I hope you'll smile." Then she tucked it into his coat pocket, a tender habit. Robert found the notes as he stood in the garage, ready for work. He read them, held them tightly for a moment, then stuffed them into his desk drawer. Sometimes, when exhaustion hit, he'd open the drawer, staring at dozens of notes stacked like dried petals. But he never wrote back, not even a line. Emily didn't blame him. She believed he was just a man of few words, that his silence held love. That belief was how she saved herself from feeling abandoned. Their home became a strange play. Emily decorated every corner with patient hands. Cacti on the porch, floral curtains, glass jars filled with daisies. She tried to make it a home, but it was filled with absence. When Robert walked through the door, carrying dust and the smell of sweat, the house didn't brighten as she hoped. It stayed dark, like an old shed. Robert moved through it like a shadow, his eyes never lingering on the details she cherished. He felt stifled, not because she did anything wrong, but because her love was a heavy blanket over his chest. He wanted to breathe, but the more he tried to escape, the heavier it felt. In his mind, Another name lingered. He kept it under his tongue like a burning secret, never spoken. It wasn't quite a person, but a shadow, a memory from his youth. A fleeting love, not deep enough for nostalgia but sharp enough to cut. Compared to it, Emily's love felt like a duty, beautiful, proper, but alien. Emily sensed it. Women always do. When she handed him coffee, she saw his hands tremble, his eyes avoid hers. She didn't ask, fearing the truth. She chose to pretend, because in that play, she could still be the gentle wife. One late evening, Emily spread fresh sheets scented with soap, hanging them to dry in the yard. As she folded them into the closet, Robert passed by, glimpsing the small flowers printed on the fabric. He remembered a dress someone else once wore, not Emily. The memory hit like a sharp blade. He turned away, hiding his silent panic from her. Emily didn't know who he remembered. She only saw him grow more distant, staying out longer, speaking less. Silence became a new resident in their home. It was no longer a shield to avoid, it was the master. Robert carried his father's weight in his chest. The old man once said, "Men don't cry, men don't dream, men endure." Robert believed it, and to survive, he swallowed Emily whole. He consumed her care, her faith, her hope, until even he felt choked. In town, whispers grew. Emily's getting thin. Robert always looks lost. But no one knew that behind that wooden door, a marriage was crumbling, like paint peeling from an old wall. At night, Emily wrote another note. "Do you remember when we watched the rain together? I wish we could go back to that moment." She tucked it into his coat. But when Robert found it, he didn't read to the end. He crumpled it, stuffed it deep in his pocket, and felt his eyes sting. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I know how much you love me." But his lips stayed locked. The only thing he kept was silence. And in that silence, he began to believe he was living a lie to his wife, his father, and himself. That night, rain poured over the Texas town like a fury. The wind howled through low rooftops, slamming against windows with harsh clatters. In the small kitchen, the yellow light fell over the dining table, where 2 plates of cold food sat ready. Emily carefully arranged the cutlery, poured a glass of beer for her husband. Robert walked in, his shirt damp with rain, his face gaunt. He sat down, silent as always. Emily looked at him, hesitating to share a small story about the neighbor's dog knocking over a flower pot. But his eyes were too empty, as if there was no room for ordinary tales. They ate a few bites, the clink of cutlery ringing out. Then, abruptly, Robert slammed his fork down. The sharp sound of metal cut through the heavy air. Emily flinched, looking up, and he spoke, his voice hoarse but clear. "I want a divorce." Emily froze. Her eyes blinked slowly, as if her mind were racing to catch up with the words. But deep down, she knew this wasn't out of nowhere. It was something she'd waited to hear, feared to hear, and knew would come someday. Robert didn't look at her. He stared at the table, as if invisible words forced him to speak. He continued, "I never loved you. My heart has always belonged to someone else." Emily's hands tightened under the table. She wanted to scream, to smash the beer bottle, to ask, why? But her body chose another response, silence. She stood, hands trembling slightly, picked up her plate, and carried it to the sink, as if she'd just heard a weather report, as if her heart hadn't been torn apart. Robert watched, confused. He'd braced for an explosion, tears, pleas, or rage, but her silence was more terrifying. It was a void that swallowed every echo. He felt relief, no storm to face, but also hollow, realizing the storm had long lived inside her. That night, Emily didn't sleep. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, feet cold, eyes fixed on the empty street. The rain on the eaves sounded like someone else's heartbeat, not hers. She thought, if she'd known this was coming, why did it still hurt so much? 2 days later, her body spoke. Nausea, dizziness, then a missed period. Emily trembled as the test showed 2 lines. She sat on the bed, holding it, not crying, not smiling, just a chilling stillness. When Robert came home that evening, she stood in the living room, her eyes oddly bright. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice calm. Robert froze. His eyes widened, his mouth opened then closed, as if words were a burden. He stepped back, shaking his head. No, no way. Not now. Emily only repeated, slowly, as if stating a fact. I'm pregnant. Silence. Then, like a timed bomb, he blurted, "Get rid of it." Those 3 words fell heavier than the thunder outside. Emily didn't blink. No screams. No pleas. She only nodded slightly. "All right, I'll take care of it." Robert exhaled, as if relieved of a weight. He didn't see that her calmness was the most dangerous thing. He thought she understood, thought it was over. But in truth, that was the moment she quietly closed the final door in her heart. That night, as he slept soundly, Emily sat by the window, hand on her still flat belly. Something sparked in her, not despair, but a plan. A life growing inside, and a decision no one could touch. The next morning, the Texas sky was heavy gray, like a rough cloth over the town. Emily sat on the bed, holding the test results. 2 red lines, undeniable. She stared until her eyes blurred, as if looking long enough would turn it into a joke. But it didn't vanish. It was in her body, quiet, steadfast, despite what others wanted. Robert came in, reeking of cigarettes and last night's sweat. He tossed his backpack on the chair, shed his coat, not bothering to look around. Emily stood, walked to the center of the room, her voice small but clear. "I'm pregnant." Robert stopped, hand still on his shirt button. He turned, his eyes blank, then panicked. He gave a bitter laugh, as if she'd told a bad joke. "No, no way. You sure?" Emily nodded. "I tested. Several times." Silence swallowed the room. Then Robert erupted, as if torn from within. "Get rid of it." The 3 words cut like a cold blade. Emily felt them graze her skin, but she didn't tremble. No tears, no screams. She stood tall, eyes locked on his, and said, "All right, I'll take care of it." Robert exhaled, a long, heavy breath, as if she'd saved him from a death sentence. He turned away, sank onto the sofa, hands cradling his head. A strange feeling rose, not joy, but selfish relief. He didn't think of her, or the life inside her, only that he wouldn't be bound further. Emily watched him, and in that moment, she understood everything. This man would never stay for love. He'd only stay if forced by duty. The very thing he feared. That night, in the dark, she lay with her hand on her belly. It was still flat, no sign yet. But something grew, not just the baby, but her resolve. She knew she wouldn't do what he wanted. She knew this child was hers, and hers alone. The next day, Emily went to the pharmacy. She bought more tests, tucked them into her coat pocket. The pharmacist gave her a curious look but didn't ask. Small towns always knew too much. Emily walked home, her shoes clicking on the pavement like a drumbeat signaling an approaching battle. When Robert returned, she acted calm, setting dinner as usual. He didn't ask, and she didn't say more. The meal passed in silence, cutlery clinking sporadically. After dinner, Robert grabbed his coat, preparing to leave. He paused, then said, "I trust you know what's best." Emily looked up, her eyes oddly bright. She replied, "Yeah, I know." Robert nodded, unaware her words meant something entirely different. He left, leaving her alone with the dark. In the bedroom, Emily opened a drawer, pulling out all the notes she'd written him. She stacked them, tied them with a ribbon, and tucked them into the bottom of a suitcase, along with a few clothes and her mother's old Bible. She didn't know where she was going, but her heart had an answer. Anywhere free of that man's cold silence. Late that night, Robert came home, drunk. He collapsed into a chair, not asking where she was, not noticing the suitcase under the bed. In his beer-soaked sleep, he dreamed of Emily leaving a sterile clinic, eyes empty, hands bloodied. He woke, sweating, heart pounding. But seeing her lying still in bed, he told himself it was just a nightmare. Emily turned away, eyes wide in the dark. She whispered to herself, "I'll take care of it. But not the way you think." 3 days after that fateful conversation, Emily vanished from the town. No one saw her leave, no arguments, no farewell scenes. Just an absence left in a house already familiar with emptiness. A neighbor said they saw a late-night bus pull away, its windows fogged, with a young woman clutching a small suitcase by the window. But no one was sure it was her. In a small town, gossip spread like wind, but truth slipped through like sand. In the red brick house, Robert returned that evening to an empty table. No smell of food, no warm light, no sound of footsteps. Only a coffee-stained mug on the counter. He called her name once, then stopped. He told himself she was at her parents' or out to clear her head. He didn't search. He never did. The next day, he went to work as usual. That evening, he noticed her closet half empty. A few dresses were gone, but he still didn't question. Instead, he sank onto the sofa, cracked a beer, and turned on the TV to drown the silence. In his mind, it was done. She'd promised to take care of it. Her absence meant she'd left so he wouldn't have to witness it. Robert lulled himself with false relief. He believed the worst was over, that the burden he feared had vanished with her steps. But even in his drunken haze, he dreamed of a faint cry, a weak heartbeat echoing from the dark. He woke, heart racing, convincing himself it was just a dream. In town, rumors spread. Emily's gone. Are they divorced? They say she couldn't take it anymore. People whispered in the diner, at the post office, in the barber shop. But no one asked directly. Robert passed by, nodded greetings, maintaining his calm facade. Inside, he was hollow, unsure if he felt anything at all. Emily was different. She sat on a long-distance bus heading south. Her small suitcase rested at her feet, holding a few clothes, her mother's Bible, and the stack of notes tied with ribbon. She leaned against the window, hand on her belly. The bus rolled past hills, leaving behind the town where love never took root. With each mile, she felt an odd lightness. No more scrutiny, no cold eyes, no heavy dinners. She whispered to herself, "You and me, we'll start over, somewhere no one knows us." At night, the bus stopped in a small town for a break. Emily stepped off, breathing in the scent of earth and unfamiliar wind. She looked at strangers passing by, feeling safer in their ignorance of her name. A new anonymity, a new life awaited. Back in the old house, Robert began to feel her absence like a new presence. No one set the table, no notes in his pockets. He passed the garden, saw wilted flowers, the bedroom door half open, empty. He swallowed a vague feeling but didn't name it. His father's words echoed, "A man must swallow pain and move on." So he did. He swallowed the emptiness, the guilt, the memory of Emily. He drank more, stayed out longer, buried himself in work and fleeting pleasures. Outwardly, he seemed freed, but inside, a void grew, like a sinkhole waiting to collapse. Austin, a March afternoon. The city hummed with familiar sounds. Street guitars, food vendors, hurried footsteps on red brick pavement. Amid the crowd, Robert walked slowly, hands in pockets, trying to seem calm. The past 8 months had aged him, his eyes deeper, his jaw dusted with stubble from sleepless nights. He'd learned to live with the void. Work at the auto shop left his hands calloused, and cheap beer became his companion. Townsfolk rarely mentioned Emily anymore. To them, the story was over. To Robert, he told himself he believed that too. But then, in the crowd, his eyes caught a figure. A woman in a simple cotton dress, hair neatly tied, carrying a bag of bread. She walked slowly, one hand supporting her back. Sunlight hit her hair, making it glow. Robert froze. It was Emily. Not just Emily, with a rounded, unmistakable belly. In that moment, time stopped. The guitars fell silent. The vendors' calls faded. The city sucked into a void. Robert's knees buckled, as if his body couldn't bear the weight of truth. "No, no way," he muttered, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. The image struck him like a hammer. 8 months ago, she nodded calmly, agreeing to take care of it. He believed her. Believed enough to walk away, to feel relieved. Now, the truth lay bare. She never did it. She kept it. Robert gripped a nearby stone bench, heart racing. He remembered every detail. Her nod, her quiet eyes, her words, "I'll take care of it." Not agreement, concealment. She let him walk away thinking he was free, when in reality, he'd been written out of the story. Emily didn't see him. She smiled faintly at a vendor, paid for her bread, and turned away. That smile was different, not the hopeful one of before. It was calm, the smile of someone who'd chosen her path. Robert sank to the sidewalk, hands trembling, eyes wet. Passers-by ignored him, assuming he was drunk. But inside, His world collapsed. He hadn't just lost his wife. He'd lost a child. No worse. The child wasn't lost. He'd been excluded. He recalled the nightmare that woke him in cold sweat. Emily leaving a clinic, eyes empty, hands bloody. He'd been relieved it was just a dream. Now he understood. The real nightmare wasn't her abortion. It was that she never did, and he'd lived 8 months blind. Emily left the square, walking slowly, hand on her belly. Robert wanted to leap up, to call her name, but his throat locked. He could only watch, a helpless spectator in a play where he was once the lead but now erased. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. His sobs came, not loud, but choked, heavy, like rusted iron creaking. For the first time, he realized the silence of their past was no longer a wall between them. It had become a chasm, and Emily had crossed to the other side without him. That night, Robert wandered like a sleepwalker. He left the square as the city lit up, his steps unsteady on wet pavement. Bar music and laughter spilled out, but it all felt like another world. His mind held only one image: Emily, pregnant, holding bread, smiling calmly. He stopped by a brick wall, breathing hard, as if he'd run miles. She never had an abortion. The thought drilled into his heart, twisting deeper with each loop. He remembered her words, "I'll take care of it." How could he have been so foolish to think it was agreement? Now, those words echoed with a different meaning. "I'll take care of it, but my way." Robert slumped to the curb, face in his hands. Tears burned, not cleansing but shattering. He realized he hadn't just lost Emily. He'd lost the chance to be a father, because he'd rejected it from the start. In his panic, he felt betrayed. She lied to him. She let him live 8 months in a false belief, let him breathe easy while the truth was otherwise. But then, a sharper question hit. Could he blame her? He recalled that night his 3 words, thrown like a verdict. Get rid of it. He gave her no choice. He didn't ask what she wanted. He commanded, cold and selfish. And she, instead of fighting, chose silence. Her calmness wasn't surrender, it was her only way to protect what she believed in. Robert laughed bitterly, the sound warped from his dry throat. She didn't betray me, she protected herself. The brutal truth was, he was the betrayer of her love, of their child, of the man he once dreamed of being. He stood, legs shaking. The city glowed with neon, but to him, everything blurred. He saw a young couple pass, the man holding his wife's hand, pushing a stroller. The sight clenched his heart. That could have been him, but it wasn't. He'd extinguished that possibility himself. Back at his rundown apartment, Robert collapsed onto the sofa, leaving the lights off. In the dark, he opened an old drawer, pulling out Emily's notes, those naive, tender words he'd never valued before. "Today I dreamed we were at the beach." He read aloud, voice trembling. "Last night you smiled in your sleep." Each word stabbed his chest. Then, at the drawer's bottom, he found a forgotten note, neatly folded. It read, "If you truly love me, I hope there's still time." Robert broke. He sank to the floor, clutching the paper like a dying piece of his soul. Regret wasn't just a thought, it was a presence. Heavy, filling the room, his chest, his every breath. He tried to imagine, how had Emily lived these 8 months? Where did she go? Who was with her when he was gone? Did she ever cry alone, hand on her belly, wondering if he thought of them? The thought choked him. That night, he didn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily crossing the square, her belly proof of all he'd rejected. He heard a heartbeat not his, but the unborn child's, strong, proud, and independent of him. At dawn, Robert stood before the mirror. Sunken eyes, disheveled hair, a stranger's face. He whispered to himself, "I didn't lose my child. My child was never mine." In that moment, he understood. The truth wasn't here to punish. It was here to expose. Love isn't duty, it's choice. And Emily had chosen to keep, to move on, to live without him. Days after seeing Emily in the square, Robert lived like a shadow. Work at the auto shop went on, hammers clanging, metal grinding, oil sizzling, but the sounds came from afar, through thick glass. He worked with his hands, but his mind was elsewhere, with a woman carrying a child and a calm smile. At night, his apartment dark, Robert sat at the kitchen table with old papers and a fountain pen. He began to write, not letters to send, for he had no address, not a diary, for it wasn't for himself. Each line was a conversation with Emily or their unborn child. Today, I saw a man carry his daughter on his shoulders. She laughed so loud. I thought, that could have been me, but I gave it up. I miss the cinnamon coffee you made. I miss the notes in my pockets. Back then, I didn't read them with my heart. Now, each word is a knife. Pages piled up. He wrote until his hand cramped, ink smudging his fingers. Some nights, he tore them up, tossing them in the trash like self-punishment. Other nights, he folded them carefully, placing them in a wooden box, as if preserving a piece of his soul. But no matter how much he wrote, one truth remained. He didn't know where Emily was. He tried her old number. Only a busy signal, then silence. He drove to her parents' house, but the door was locked tight. A neighbor shook their head. They sold the place, moved away. Robert stood there, staring at the weathered wooden fence, his heart heavy as stone. He knocked lightly on the gate, hoping for a miracle, but only the desert wind answered. He returned, weighed down. It felt like chasing a ghost, a woman he'd lived with, touched daily. Now so distant she left no trace. One drunken night, Robert wandered to a bridge, staring at the black river below. He thought of letting go, letting the water take everything. But then he heard the child's heartbeat from his dreams, a steady drum. It pulled him back, made him stand firm on the railing. He whispered, "If you're still out there, I can't disappear." From that day, Robert eased off the drinking, not to save himself, but to hold on to something for the day he might see Emily again. He didn't know when or how, but the thought became a small flame, flickering in the dark. He kept writing, no more tearing up. He wrote about the past, his foolishness, the things he never said. He confessed his fears, his selfishness, and the moments he wanted to love but didn't know how. I thought love was duty. Now I know duty without love is a prison, and I locked you in it. He folded the letters, placed them in the wooden box. It became a confession, a fragile hope. Maybe one day Emily would read them, maybe never. But at least he'd left a mark of change, a silent apology. One rainy night, he opened the box, took a letter, and read aloud in the dark. "If you truly love me, I hope there's still time. Your words, Emily." He placed beside it his trembling response. "You were right. There's still time, if you'll let me." He sat for hours, listening to rain tap the tin roof, like fate knocking. He knew he'd have to leave this place soon. No more running, no more silence. If Emily could nurture life alone, he had to find the courage to face her. That morning, the Texas sky was pale gray, sunlight hidden by lazy clouds. Robert stood on his apartment's porch, holding the wooden box of unsent letters. He knew staying here would kill him slowly in silence. The truth had surfaced, and he couldn't let it swallow him. He packed lightly, a few clothes, an old wallet, the letterbox. Locking the door, he felt like he was leaving a prison he'd built himself. The quiet room, smelling of stale beer and motor oil, was now just an empty shell. He didn't look back. Robert began his search for Emily with faint clues. An old mechanic in town had heard she had family in New Mexico, an older woman, living in a small village where the desert met the mountains. No one knew her name, only Grandma Gomez. The name clung to Robert like a guiding thread. He boarded a long-distance bus, sitting by the window, just as Emily had 8 months before. The wheels ground over dry roads, dust swirling. Robert stared out, watching mountains fade, the desert stretching wide. For the first time in years, he let himself sit still, not escaping into beer or work. He sat with the emptiness, letting it gnaw. On the bus, he opened the letterbox, reading one aloud. "If you can hear me, I'm sorry, not for your coming, but for wanting you gone." He folded it, his heart aching. The woman beside him glanced over but didn't ask. Her eyes, old but warm, seemed to understand he was searching for something unnameable. 3 days, 3 bus routes. Robert reached New Mexico as night fell. The town was poor, with dirt roads, faded tile roofs, and the smell of dust and dry wind. He asked around, lost like an outsider. A barefoot child pointed to a house with a weathered wooden gate, where wildflowers grew stubbornly. Robert stood before the gate, heart pounding. He knocked. The door opened not to Emily, but to an older woman with sharp eyes and a straight posture, Grandma Gomez. She sized him up, her gaze piercing yet knowing. Without asking his name, she seemed to know who he was. Robert lowered his head, voice hoarse. I need to see Emily." She didn't answer right away. She let him stand there, silent, as if weighing whether he deserved entry. Finally, she opened the door wider, her voice steady. "Come in, but don't expect a welcome." Robert stepped into the dirt yard, hearing roosters crow, smelling fresh tortillas. The small house was simple but alive, a life he'd never seen in the home he shared with Emily. He felt choked, as if every brick here knew how to love. In the kitchen, Grandma Gomez stirred a pot over the fire, speaking without looking at him. "Rose doesn't want you here." Robert gripped the letterbox tighter. He nodded, voice low. "I know, but I had to come. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to be near, even if it's just outside the door." Grandma Gomez sighed, a sound heavy with years. She turned, her eyes stern but not cruel. "If you truly want to change, stay. No promises, no grand words, just actions. If not, leave now." Robert swallowed, nodding. In that moment, he understood. He wasn't just looking for Emily. He was seeking a chance to become a different man, one who stayed. That night, she prepared a bed for him in a small back room, smelling of old wood and desert earth. Robert lay there, eyes wide, hearing the wind through the door cracks. He knew Emily was somewhere in this house, just steps away, but the distance felt deeper than any desert. He placed the letter box on his chest, whispering, "Tomorrow, I'll begin." Dawn in New Mexico slipped through the window like pale gold silk. Robert woke early, nerves taut like he was preparing for a trial. He washed his face with cold water from a basin on the porch, staring at his reflection in a dented metal mirror. It wasn't the face he knew, gaunt, but for the first time in years, his eyes held a spark of resolve. He heard footsteps in the kitchen, the clatter of pots, the scent of flour and cinnamon mixing with coffee. He stepped in, and there she was, Emily. She wore a loose cotton shirt, hair tied high, her figure visibly changed, her belly large, her movements slow and careful as she stirred a pot. Robert stood frozen at the door, barely breathing. Emily didn't turn immediately. She sensed him, from his breath, from the sudden stillness in the kitchen. After a moment, she spoke, her voice steady, neither high nor low. "You don't have to pretend everything's okay." Robert swallowed hard, his heart tightening. He answered softly, almost pleading, "I'm not here to pretend. I just want to stay." Emily turned her head. Her eyes were direct. No tears, no trembling. The eyes of someone who'd walked through pain and rebuilt herself from ruins. That gaze made Robert lower his head, like a guilty man before a judge. She resumed stirring, asking calmly, "How long do you plan to stay?" "As long as you'll let me," he said, voice shaking. Emily paused, took a deep breath, then stirred again. No more words. The days that followed weren't a storm but a quiet undercurrent. They lived under one roof but avoided facing each other. Emily tended to the kitchen, the vegetable garden, read on the porch. Robert cleaned the yard, fixed a leaky faucet, carried water, did small tasks he'd never noticed before. Silence enveloped them, but it wasn't the killing silence of the past. Now, it was a tacit agreement. She allowed him to be there, and he had to prove himself with every gesture. One afternoon, Robert saw Emily struggling to reach a jar of flour on a high shelf. She winced, breathing heavily. He stepped forward, voice cautious. "Can I help?" She turned to look at him. For the first time in 8 months, their eyes truly met. No anger, no tenderness, just probing. A look that asked, "Have you really changed?" Robert took a breath. He said, each word clear, "I don't want to take over. Just help, if you'll let me." Emily was silent for a moment. Then she stepped back, letting him take the jar. That small moment felt to Robert like a door cracking open. That evening, he sat in the back room, writing another letter, but this time different. He meant to give it to her. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. That's too much to ask. I just ask to be here, to learn to be a decent man. Not for me, but for our child." He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and left it on the kitchen table. The next morning, it was gone. Emily said nothing. She only set breakfast, sat, and ate in silence. Robert didn't ask, but a small flame sparked in him. At least she'd read it. Grandma Gomez watched from a distance. She didn't interfere, just observed with the eyes of someone who'd seen marriages bloom and wither. One afternoon, as Robert carried water to the garden, she said firmly, "Don't think staying is enough. Staying is easy. Staying decent is hard." Robert nodded, sweat rolling down his temple. He knew this wasn't a short path. He had to learn to stay every day, in every small detail, in every silent glance from Emily. That night, he lay in bed, hearing the desert wind, hearing Emily's light steps in the hall. He closed his eyes, whispering, "Tomorrow, I'll begin again. Tomorrow, and every day after." One morning, golden sunlight spilled across the porch. Emily sat in a wooden chair, hand on her belly, eyes distant. Robert stepped out, holding a cup of cinnamon tea he'd learned to make from Grandma Gomez. He set it gently on the table beside her, saying nothing. Emily glanced at it, stayed silent, but took a sip. To Robert, that was a step forward. Days passed, and they found a new rhythm. Robert was no longer an outsider watching. He joined in small tasks, clearing the garden, fixing the leaky roof, even learning to hand-wash cloth diapers. Each evening, he warmed water for Emily to soak her feet, saying little, just letting her know he was there. Grandma Gomez watched it all. She didn't praise or scold, but sometimes, seeing Robert rock an old teddy bear, practicing as if the baby were here, she gave a rare, faint smile, a sign a seed was sprouting in barren soil. Emily kept her distance at first. She avoided his eyes, kept words short, movements brisk. But Robert didn't give up. He knew she didn't need promises or empty remorse. She needed time, and for the first time, he was ready to wait. One evening, as desert wind whispered through the window, Emily spoke unexpectedly. "Do you ever think, what if things had been different?" Robert sat still, his heart aching. He answered slowly, "Every day. But I don't want to live on what-ifs anymore. I just want to live with what's left." Emily didn't reply. But when she left the table, she didn't take the tea he'd made. She left it, half drunk. To Robert, that was a silent acknowledgement. She wasn't fully shutting him out. Weeks later, Emily went into labor. That night, Robert was a panicked child, but he didn't run. He helped her into the car, held her hand tightly all the way to the small clinic. In the dim light, he heard his heart blend with the child's fast, urgent, full of fear but also hope. When the first cry rang out, Robert stood frozen. In his arms, a tiny, red, fragile yet fierce life. Tears fell as he whispered, "Hi, little one. Daddy's here." Emily, exhausted, saw the scene, and something in her softened. Not instant forgiveness, not old love reborn, but recognition. The man before her was different. The days that followed filled the small house with new sounds. Cries, laughter, hurried footsteps. Robert fumbled with diapers, learned to hold the baby, even sang off-key lullabies. Emily watched, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent, but her eyes softened. One afternoon, returning from a construction site, covered in sweat and dust, Robert saw Emily on the porch, cradling their child. She looked at him, longer than usual, then softly said, "Want to hold her?" Robert froze. He nodded, taking the baby with trembling hands. Her tiny eyes looked up, questioning. In that moment, the world shrank to just him, Emily, and their child. That evening, as the baby slept, Robert pulled a small box from his pocket. Not an expensive ring, just a simple silver one he'd saved for over months of work. He knelt, quiet, no tears. "I was a fool, Emily. I loved you from the start but took too long to understand. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to build again, this time with real love." Emily looked at him. Her eyes held layers, old anger, unhealed wounds, but also budding trust. She didn't answer right away. She touched the ring, pushed it gently back into his hand, and said softly, "Not today, but maybe someday." Robert bowed his head, swallowing a sob. He understood. Her answer wasn't rejection. It was a door cracked open, for someone willing to wait. Night fell, the small house calm. Grandma Gomez sat on the porch, her eyes kind. Emily held the baby. Robert sat nearby, silent. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was the silence of peace of a family. Imperfect, but real. Night in New Mexico was serene. In the small house, the baby's steady breaths mixed with the slow breaths of two adults who'd once lost each other. Robert sat on the porch, watching the moonlight gild the old tile roof. He knew things weren't complete. Wounds lingered, painful memories unhealed. But amid it all, there was something new: faith. Emily didn't promise. She hadn't forgiven. But she let him stay, let him hold their child, let him be part of a world she'd once guarded alone. And sometimes, in a fleeting glance, Robert saw a faint, stubborn spark. The spark of a beginning. This story doesn't end with a yes or a kiss. It ends with silence, but a gentle one, where what can't yet be said still has a chance to be understood. If you've followed me to the end, leave a comment. I still believe in tomorrow. Because true love sometimes begins not with fiery passion, but with patience and the choice to stay day by day, hour by hour.